I'd like to call the April 17th, 2014 meeting of the Transportation Commission for the City of Edina to order. Could we have the roll call first, please?
Member Bass?
Here.
Member Betke?
Here.
Member Iyer?
Here.
Member Janovy?
Here.
Member LaForce?
Here.
Chair Nelson?
Here.
Member Olson?
Here.
Member Sirks? Member Spanicky? Member Van Dyke?
Here.
And Member Whited.
All right, thank you, Sharon. I'd like to turn it back to Mark Nolan for election of the chair.
Thanks, Chair Nelson. So tonight's meeting serves as the ETC's annual meeting, and we'll be electing chair and vice chair. And so for that process, the commissioners will nominate for the chair and then vote on for that position. And then I'll turn it over to the new chair for election of vice chair.
Okay.
So I'd like to open the floor for
nominations?
nominations.
I'll nominate Catherine Bass as chair.
Second. Are there any other nominations?
All those in favor of Commissioner Bass as chair, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. The new chair of the ETC is Chair Bass, and I will turn it over to you for election of vice chair.
Okay. So we have nominations for nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Tom.
A second. Oh, okay. So is there, so can we go ahead and vote then? Any other nominations? Okay, so all in favor of Tom LaForce as vice chair, please say aye.
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 Nay? Okay, so Tom LaForce is our vice chair. Congratulations, Tom.
I think it works. You feel okay?
Oh, I wasn't clear. I was facilitating this meeting, chairing this meeting. This is immediate, effective immediately. Okay, so getting us back to the agenda. Next, we need to approve the meeting agenda. Are there any changes that anyone would like to propose to the meeting agenda?
Could I just verify that everybody has the updated agenda that was sent out? There was one that the Bike Edina working group was.
Yeah, I didn't print it.
did.
Where in the agenda is that topic?
That's a good question. I didn't print it either.
It's
Yeah.
inserted.
Me neither.
It's inserted at the end after the Traffic Safety Committee report. So that
So
will be
it's new
item
item
F.
F?
New
Item
item
F.
F.
Yes,
And then updates is G?
Yes.
that's correct.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So hearing, oh, and Surya?
Chair, congratulations. first.
Thanks.
I did have one thing that I brought. I sent that by email to former Chair Nelson, and this is something that I could just speak to as part of my member comments.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be added to the agenda. It's just a response to, it was actually one of the things that I was supposed to do on the meeting when it was canceled because of weather.
Okay.
So I brought it now.
So maybe address during member comments, and if it needs to be added to an upcoming agenda, we can talk about that later.
Perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Any other changes?
I'll move approval of the meeting agenda.
Great.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of the meeting agenda?
Aye.
Nay? Okay, great. So we have an approved agenda. Let's take a look at the minutes. And we'll open it up for any edits. Commissioner Iyer?
Just a small correction. I'd like to change member Surya to member Iyer on
Yes.
page 2.
Anything else? I had one minor edit on page 2, the fifth paragraph down where it begins, Member Bass said any decision or recommendation should be values-based. I just want to clarify that minor edit there so that it doesn't suggest that it should be based on like my values, but rather a community conversation about our values with regard to mobility for seniors. Any other edits or changes? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Great. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
And nay? Great. Minutes are approved as amended. Okay. Next up, community comment. Is there anyone from the community that would like to speak to the commission? Nope? Okay. Great. Well, just as a broadcast to the community, we do welcome folks to come in and share their thoughts with us. So if anyone sees this, come talk to us about transportation. Okay, we're going to move on then to item 6, reports and recommendations, and A, which is the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail update.
Eric Nelson is here from Three Rivers Park District to give a presentation and answer questions.
Welcome, Mr. Nelson.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, thank you for your time tonight. As Mark said, I'm Eric Nelson, Senior Manager of Engineering with Three Rivers Park District, and I will give you an update on our preliminary engineering efforts so far on the Edina segment of the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. Here's a little outline of my presentation. I will give an update on preliminary engineering. I'm going to step through the Edina segment in a little bit of detail for anyone who's new on the commission or maybe it's been a while. I'll highlight a couple areas where we know that the route is going to change from the master plan alignment. Then I'll give you a quick overview of what we're going to do in terms of public participation on this project. I'll run through the timeline of the design and construction process as we see it right now, and then we can take any questions you might have. Here's an overall map of the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. It's 15 miles from Hopkins to Bloomington. And with the exception of the Edina segment, it is all built already. So we're looking forward to turning that Edina segment from a dash line to a solid line, as they say. We split up the Edina segment into 2 halves for grant application purposes. But as I said, it's about 7.5 miles overall, the Edina segment. And I'll just run through the 2 segments in a little bit of detail for you here. It starts at 169. It's constructed to about right here, and the master plan showed 2 alternatives in a sense. One was an underpass under 169, boardwalk along the creek, and then passing along the east side of Lincoln Drive and coming down to the intersection of Londonderry and Lincoln Drive. As we got into preliminary engineering and started looking at the feasibility of that underpass and got better information about flood levels in 9 Mile Creek, utilities in the area, bridge clearances, etc., we learned that it is not going to be feasible to go underneath 169, and I'll talk about that in a little bit of detail on another slide. The alternative that has been approved by city staff at Minnetonka will run down the east side of Smetana and over the new Bren Road Londonderry Drive Bridge. The trail then continues along the northeastern side of, we call it the former United Healthcare property. As I understand, it's vacant right now. It will need an easement there. Passes through a large wetland complex on the south side of 9 Mile Creek, crosses over the creek and comes up to back towards Londonderry Drive, then goes into Walnut Ridge Park and runs along an existing trail on the southwest side of Walnut Ridge Park. Crosses another large wetland complex on a boardwalk. We have an at-grade crossing of Vernon Avenue, and then the trail will run down the east side of Gleason Road, come into Bredesen Park down here, likely will follow an existing path in the park right now, come over a new bridge over Highway 62 and down into the school campus, pass through the school campus roughly like so, and I'll talk about in more detail about that in another slide too. Come up to Tracy Avenue. There'll be an at-grade crossing at Tracy Avenue. From there, we move into the east segment. The trail generally follows the creek near Cahill Road, parallel to the railroad tracks, and then there's another redesign in this red oval area where the trail was intended to pass underneath the CP rail line. And I'll talk to you on another slide in more detail about that. The trail will ultimately end up coming down Metro Boulevard, another freeway bridge over Highway 100, pass along the west side of Lake Edina, and probably we're in discussions with this area with MnDOT right now, but it's looking like the master plan route where running parallel to the on-ramp from West 77th to 100, that's probably how it's going to end up working. From there, it runs along the south side of Fred Richards Golf Course, comes up to the west side of Park Lawn Avenue. The segment along Gallagher Drive is constructed. That was built, I think, 2 summers ago in conjunction with the city street reconstruction project. From there, the trail runs along the promenade, there we go, and down to the west side of Xerxes Avenue, where it ties in with the Richfield segment. Here's a little blow up of that 169 crossing. The red and yellow show what was proposed in the master plan. When we saw that the underpass wasn't going to work, we looked at a couple options, one being a bridge here, another being a bridge down here at Smetana Court, and then a different parallel route along the west side of 169 and the exit ramp to Londonderry Drive. And none of these alternatives really proved feasible, either from a cost perspective or this route along the west side of 169. There are some pretty big problems with having to fill in the city's stormwater pond, wetland impacts, private property impacts, et cetera. So the alternative we're proceeding with is the one shown in orange, where the trail will run along the east side of Smetana Drive using, in the interim condition, it'll be using existing 8-foot wide sidewalk. The long-term plan for this segment would be to do a similar scheme to like Gallagher Drive in Edina, where when the city comes to reconstruct the street, we would look at trying to incorporate our more typical 10-foot wide bituminous trail into a city reconstruction project at that time. And then the other area I mentioned was down at 70th Street, where the trail, the yellow line you see was the proposed master plan route, and the trail was proposed to pass underneath the railroad tracks in an underpass structure and then run along the north side of Abercrombie Park and then down to 70th Street. Again, as we looked at the feasibility of this underpass structure and looked at the available clearance between the top of railroad tracks and the banks of 9 Mile Creek and the relative flood elevations of the creek, there's just not enough vertical separation there to get underneath the railroad tracks and not have the trail be wet all the time. So we are currently looking at an alternative. Our preferred alternative, so to speak, would come down here and pass through this area between this apartment building and the tracks. There would then be a new underpass structure underneath 70th Street, and then we're working with the city on how the design would work to, this is quite low in this area, how to wrap the trail around in some manner and get back up to 70th Street. This is a city-owned property that Public Works uses right now to stockpile gravel and other types of things. So again, we're in discussions with city staff on how that alternative might work. Ultimately, the trail would come back up and run along the south side of 70th Street. Behind the curb, we would have to do some widening behind the curb and build some retaining walls over the railroad underpass structure. But it would follow along the south side of 70th all the way down to Metro Boulevard. So I'll talk a little bit about our public participation efforts. As we got into preliminary engineering, we knew that we had the general guidance from the City Council approval to maximize the distance of the trail the best we could from residences and to minimize the length and height of boardwalks to the extent we could within the confines of the engineering guidelines, the regulatory requirements, et cetera. And as we looked at that, we found that generally with the master plan route as it sits, there's really not a lot of room for change on that route, so to speak. So other than the two locations I discussed with you, the route is generally going to be where it's shown in the master plan. So with that in mind, we're focusing our public participation on meeting the screening requirements that were defined in the council approval. And that was to basically provide homeowners that are along the trail within a reasonable distance with some options in terms of fencing or vegetation that would screen them from the new trail if so desired. So we've determined the criteria we're going to use is where a resident's property line is within 50 feet of the proposed trail edge. We would offer some screening options to that resident. And there's a little bit of wiggle room in that criteria in we want to maintain some corridor continuity, so to speak. If there are 2 or 3 homes that meet the 50-foot criteria and then maybe due to the meander of the creek or the trail, there are a group of homes that would be outside, and then moving further down, say another group of homes are within that 50 feet, we would offer the screening to those homes between the 2 areas meeting the 50 feet criteria, just in the interest of continuity and fairness along there. We're looking at offering either 3 types of fence, privacy, split rail or chain link, or some screening options. We've picked out 5 or 6 types of shrubs or coniferous trees that would screen properties from the trail. And again, this is all at the property owner's discretion. They don't have to do this if they don't want to. We are proposing that this screening would go on the resident side of the property line, and we would pay for the construction, but after that it would become the homeowner's responsibility. You know, ultimately we'd like neighbors to get together within logical groups and maybe agree on a consistent treatment throughout, but we're not going to require that. If it goes fence, shrub, nothing, fence, we're okay with that. Here's an update on the timeline. We are here in April giving the committee an update. Between now and June, we'll be working on dialing in the alignment, working on that 70th Street situation and any others that need a little bit more fine-tuning. And we will be back to see you again in June, I believe at the June 17th meeting. And from there, we would be asking that you recommend to council approval of the route or pass along any comments that you had at that time. We are tentatively scheduled for July 1st to be in front of City Council asking for approval of the final route. From there, we'll spend the fall preparing final plans and ideally be out to bid early 2015. As we see it right now, we're envisioning the entire Edina segment happening sequentially, no gaps in construction between the east and west segment. 2 construction seasons, 2015 and 2016 for sure. It may spill into 2017 a certain amount, but the goal is to have the full trail open and ready for use in 2017. That is somewhat contingent on funding. We have a federal grant for the east half. The funding for the east half is in place, and this is Jonathan Blaming, our Associate Superintendent of Planning, Design, and Technology. He's working with our board to come up with some funding schemes for the west half, but we have the goal of building the entire Edina segment at one time. We do have a primary point of contact for communication assigned to this project. His contact information is here, and Mark, I have hard copies of the presentation. I'll leave with you if anybody would like one, but just encourage everybody to use Jason McGrew King as a resource. If you get questions or comments that you don't have answers to, he's there and ready to help. We're routing everything through him just to try to be consistent in the message we provide and to give the most accurate and timely responses we can. So feel free to call Jason anytime something comes up. And that's all I had. I can take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and I'll open it up for questions.
Of the 7.5 miles, about what percent would you say is, off-road, going along the creek versus adjacent to an existing road? It's like about half, and maybe
At least, I would say. I was going to, from the hip, say about 2/3 off-road, 1/3.
about 2/3.
Does that sound right, John? A little less, a little more? Yeah, 60/40.
I mean,
The majority, I would say, is separated from the road.
because when you look at a map, I mean, you see the whole west part of the project as really curvy, following the creek, and then it almost just gets really, straight, which to me says following roads, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. And the creek at Highway 100, takes a turn and goes due south, and we have to keep going east with the trail to tie in for the Richfield segment, so we kind of lose the creek in a sense at Highway 100, but
Yeah.
There appear to be a few areas where it does go through some pretty concentrated housing and areas. And one of those is along the, just as you get on the east side of Tracy Avenue, come along the
yes.
creek. I guess my question, you're running on the west for the generally the west side of the track there. Is that area, I've been told in the past that this is going to be more of a boardwalk structure through there, where the creek is real close and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Is that still the plan? And then what would the side rails, I know the full design isn't done, but
sure.
How are the side rails envisioned there? And I guess the main question is leading to, what is the access to and from the trail in those areas where it is close to the houses? I mean, I understand you said there are fences potentially on the owner's property, but to and from the trail, how would potentially those owners along that area, homeowners, access the trail?
To answer your first question about boardwalks, we in this area are going to try to keep the trail up on the high side to the extent we can to avoid boardwalks, but I think definitely within that stretch, some of it is going to have to be, the corridor is just too narrow to avoid it. So the railings on boardwalks are typically about 4.5 feet tall, and they have a wire mesh along it. So in that case, I believe people would have to go down to 70th Street to get on the trail.
Or pick it up at Tracy?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned 2 crossings, one at Vernon and one at Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have more information about those? Those are both pretty busy streets.
We aren't really there yet in the design. We hired a consultant, SRF consulting group, to go through all our crossings district-wide last year and write a guidance document for us on safety and consistency so that we can try to treat all our trail crossings the same district-wide in the interest of safety, sending consistent message to trail users, et cetera. So the principles that came out of that study definitely will be applied at these crossings, but I can't tell you at this point exactly what those crossings look like in terms of crosswalk markings, refuge islands, et cetera. We're just not there yet.
Will that be by June, or is that after that period?
It's probably in the fall.
Oh, okay.
So, thank you again for the very useful presentation. So about the treatments behind the homeowners' residences, are you, I mean, you sort of said that it could be a fence, shrub fence, nothing. Would it be better that, Three Rivers Park District recommends the best treatment at that point? Wouldn't that be a little more uniform, kind of also reduce cost? You don't want to do fence, shrub fence. I mean, I don't know. I think I just, the gut feeling is that that's going to cost more. instead of the same treatment across the board.
You're right. I think it would be more costly if it's piecemeal. My opinion, I don't think it would look as nice. I think we're going to meet with people and kind of see how it goes. A lot of people have big trees or fences or things in their backyard already. Some people may want to see the trail. I think we've said we're not going to require one treatment per segment, so we kind of have to honor that. But I'm hopeful that, like you say, it turns into more of a uniform selection across logical segments.
Oh, go ahead.
The section over when it crosses 100, I know you talked about it. Could you repeat that? What is that again? Is that a
In
bridge? Yep. No.
Up here?
Yep, right
yeah,
there.
that's a bridge over Highway 100, yes.
Okay. And what is the estimated cost of that bridge?
I believe it's about $3 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up, and you might have mentioned this already, but in the outreach to homeowners along the trail, what is your method for doing that outreach? Is it kind of a combination of, both something sent to the home, but then also going door to door, or what's your method for that?
It's going to start out as a packet of information about the trail, pictures, and information about the screening options. And we're talking about setting up as kind of an online poll where you could go on and just toggle your selection. But we're also going to offer to meet with people in person if they'd like to, or if a group of neighbors would like to get together, we'll certainly accommodate that request. So it's going to start out as an informational mailing, and we'll just kind of take it from there as people respond to that.
As a point of information, I think in some recent street reconstruction projects that the city has done, we've started to do more going door to door with neighbors, and that seems to result in good outcomes. So,
Okay.
just as an idea.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
About how many property owners will be involved in screening decisions?
We've identified about 70 to 75, and that's counting apartment buildings as one property, essentially. I think about 35 or so fall within this corridor right here. So I can the Cahill, or I'm sorry, up here, the Cahill Road area that we discussed earlier, where the creek corridor is pretty tight and there are residential properties on both sides. Right in this general area is where about half of them are.
Roughly how close to the west side of the track is that going to be allowed? How close to the rail can you be?
We have to be off of CP Rail property entirely. So
what's their, how much right of way do they have through there?
Let's say 75 feet or so.
From the center of the track or
Yeah.
so? Okay.
There are transmission lines there as well. We've been talking to Xcel Energy about what they're going to want to see in terms of clearance around the foundations for their transmission line towers and things like that. So far, they are supportive and will work with us. So, but the trail will be on city-owned land up until we get close to that apartment building. There, we would need an easement for the trail, and I can go back to that slide. If that helps. So I believe city land ends about right here. So this segment through here would need an easement. You can see the transmission line tower here, and then there's another one just off the screen.
So generally, the 50-foot rule that won't apply to any of these houses that can be seen in this picture.
Correct.
Up north until you get probably closer to there's a Heights Park up there in that area. Okay.
Correct.
Any other? Yep.
The, the crossing at France Avenue, that's at grade.
It is.
Do you see that being a big challenge to get people across a busy road?
Yeah, I mean, by nature it is. The design will follow the overall France Avenue corridor. As I understand it, there was a study done and improvements made to all the at-grade crossings along that corridor, and so the design would be consistent with that. But yeah, I think crossing that busy of a road is a challenge.
Commissioner LaForce?
The proposed crossing on Londonderry, that bridge is, just was recently reconstructed. Is there room on it, or would they have to be modified again or somehow?
No, there is room on the north side of the bridge.
Up on the sidewalk level or on down
Yes,
the?
yes,
Okay.
up on the sidewalk level. That as they designed that, we worked together and everyone understood that there may be the need to route the regional trail over that bridge, and they designed width on that bridge accordingly. So
That was good thinking.
I can't take credit personally, but somebody did a good job.
So just to clarify, you said that briefly, but the proposed crossing at France Avenue on Gallagher would be similar to the ones that are ongoing now on France Avenue at
Correct.
66th, 70th, and 76th?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming in
Thank
to
you
share
for
this
your time.
information. We'll look forward to seeing you again in June.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are moving on to the West 54th Street draft striping and signage plan.
Yes, Chair Bass. As you recall, in December, City Council approved the design for the reconstruction of West 54th Street between Wooddale and France. That reconstruction project is happening this year, and staff and consultant wanted to share with you the draft signage and striping plan for that segment of roadway and to solicit any comments that you might have. I do realize that the report states that the consultant will be on hand to take comments. That is not the case, but I'd be happy to do that and relay any on to the consultant if necessary. Any comments?
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Janovi.
The bikes may use full lane signs are going to be custom. That's what I think I'm seeing. They're going to be white on green. And I had a question about what the thinking is behind that, because last year the city adopted some new standards for bikeway signage that use the standard. Bikes may use full lane, the black on white. So I'm just curious what the thinking is about making the white on green signs. I haven't seen those before on a street, but do you know?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I can ask that question. I do realize that we did have passed new standards last year, and if there are standard signs, then we're going to have to take a look at using those.
Okay, that would be my preference. I mean, I think the corridor there is unique enough. It doesn't need something different for signs.
Yeah, I think we should be striving for standardization with signage as much as possible.
Yeah. And that was really my only comment.
Any other comments for Planner Nolan? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for bringing that to us. Okay, we'll move on to the draft citywide pedestrian facilities plan. Or no, facilities maps, sorry.
Thank you again. So you also may recall that, well, for quite a while now, we have been working with the ETC and also with council, not only on the Living Streets plan, but also on sidewalk prioritization, our sidewalk plan that's in the current comprehensive plan, and looking at ways to prioritize future projects, especially considering the new pedestrian and cyclist safety fund that we have on hand to help us do that. And so as part of the Living Streets process, and over the past couple of months, staff has been putting together a more updated sidewalk plan that was sent to you in 4 quadrants. And what this plan shows, for the most part, The solid lines are, the orange solid lines are the existing sidewalks, and we've put together both the bituminous and concrete sidewalks for the purposes of the plan. And then dashed lines are proposed sidewalks. And as the report says, the vast majority of those sidewalks are what are currently in our comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2008, but I understand those sidewalks were in that state of proposal for at least a few years before that. But there are some additions and there are some changes, and those changes are based on the current draft of the Living Streets Plan, which has different street types according to function, and some of those street types have certain requirements in terms of sidewalks. So the blue underline for the streets that you see are collectors and local connectors, and those are streets that are required according to the current draft to have sidewalks on at least one side of the street. In most cases, there were already sidewalks either existing or proposed on those streets, but there were cases where they weren't, and so staff has added sidewalks according to that. And then those streets that are minor arterials, which is also the functional classification of the street, not just the Living Streets classification, are required to have sidewalks on both sides of the street. And so that's why you see that indicated on the plan. I'd also like to add that the purple dashed lines are the recommendations that are in the current final draft of the Active Routes to School plan. And we wanted to differentiate those sidewalks a little bit, just to give some sense of priority, because it's the sense that perhaps those sidewalks would have a little bit more of a priority in terms of implementation. And since I have sent this to you, we've solicited input from staff and others, so I'm already gathering input, and that's what I wanted to get from you all here tonight. The idea is that this plan, once finalized, will not only have a home in the Living Streets plan, but may also be adopted by council prior to the adoption of that plan and potentially amended to the comprehensive plan to replace the current sidewalk plan. Any comments, questions?
Questions for Planner Nolan on the maps provided?
My understanding is the Active Routes to School sidewalks have a different funding treatment, where the school board or the schools pay a portion of it, the city pays a portion of it.
No, that they would be paid for out of the PACS fund, but however, some of that infrastructure is eligible for additional funding through the state in terms of Active Routes to School or Safe Routes to School funding.
There are, in the guidelines, there is a school walking zone sidewalk plan or funding for that is a different treatment. I can go and look that up. I have some records on that.
Larry, you're right. That is there. That's an old funding policy. And when the council adopted the PACs, they haven't necessarily gone through all those old policies to make them align. So when, like, the school road sidewalk was recently done, and that was paid for 100% with PACs, and it's been my understanding so far that that's going to be the plan going forward.
I was hoping there could be some additional funding sources. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing prohibits the city from pursuing the state funding, which would be supplemental to what we have available through the PACS fund, as long as we have a plan approved. That is one of the requirements. Commissioner LaForce?
Mark, could you tell me on the roads that aren't active, on the proposals that aren't active routes to school, they're not on an arterial or a collector. Every now and then there's like a little red dashed line that just sort of shows up, and it doesn't seem to be explained by one of those other rules. For example, I'm looking at Knoll Drive in the northwest quadrant. There's a little stretch there, a little diagonal stretch that just sort of shows up, and I would not understand why that would be there. The whole area just southwest of 50th and France looks like there's a whole lot of proposed sidewalks there, and it doesn't. I'm not sure what's the criteria for those extra areas that are proposed.
Yeah, Commissioner LaForest, the criteria or the primary reason why sidewalks like that appear is because they're in the current comprehensive plan as proposed sidewalks, which means, so we're carrying those over until we find a reason why they don't need to be there. So we don't want to say with the Living Streets plan that only streets that are designated as collectors, local connectors, and arterials should have sidewalks and all others shouldn't. There are other criteria as well. Those streets that are adjacent to or in the vicinity of a park or a public building, which also may be the reason some of that is appearing. And the Arden Park area that you're looking at, those sidewalks, actually there are more sidewalks in the comprehensive plan for that area than what's shown right now. So we're trying to balance some of those needs in the plan. So those sidewalks are, because of their location between the commercial district and the Arden Park and the creek, the thought is that there's a pedestrian shed that should be addressed. So that's why those would appear.
Well, then I would add that, at some point, as we're kind of filling out the map, if some of these are on here because of the previous comprehensive plan, I think it'd be important to still go back and try to understand what's the justification for those. How did they get in the plan in the first place? Because, to Commissioner Ayer's point in previous meetings, you look at this and there's going to be areas that are pretty dense with sidewalks, and looking like they're going to have more sidewalks, and other areas where they're pretty sparse. And, I think it'd be a legitimate question for someone to ask, well, why sidewalks there and not here?
Mm-hmm. As a follow-on to that, I think I agree. I think that's important. And I know it can get really messy with maps when you try to layer too many things in. So I'm aware of that as I offer this comment. But I'm noticing, there are other areas, like, for example, in the southwest quadrant, another one of these little sort of, red dotted lines for planned sidewalk along a road that's not a collector or a local connector or minor arterial, but I know that area on Amundsen Avenue is, it's a destination at retail and restaurant and convenience store and that kind of thing. But it's not noted here in the same way that schools and churches and parks are. But I think that is what you were saying earlier about, this area that, south of 50th in France, where we know that it's a place where people walk to get somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so I think kind of having a sense of where those districts are would be really helpful if we could do that in a way that is not completely overwhelming with all the other things that we have on this map. Mm-hmm. I think it would be worthwhile to note that those business districts are places where we want to make sure that there's infrastructure anywhere that, cars are driving to, people are going to want and need to walk there as well.
That's a good point, a good suggestion. I've seen other maps of this type that do use graphics to indicate commercial or retail centers.
Yeah, if we could figure that out, that'd be great.
And that would be, and I think that'd be important because, I circled that same thing as one of those little weird things, and I had forgotten until you just mentioned that. It's like, oh yeah, that's TJ's and all that stuff, right? I just saw what looked like a little loop on a map that I'd forgotten was a retail block or two.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question about moving forward as these sidewalks get prioritized. Will there be any way to find out that information? Like, will it be, there's just so many sidewalks on here. This is going to take years and years. But if, say somebody was interested in finding out if there would be a sidewalk in their neighborhood and they were wondering what the time frame would be, is that information that will be, published with this, or?
To the best we can. I think right now we kind of see this plan as in the near future we have a good sense of what may likely be constructed in the next 2 to 5 years, given our street reconstruction projects and our other funding sources and other priorities. I think after that point, and this is something that staff's still working on and we're looking for input on, is how to demonstrate those other priorities. So either that means there's a 0 to 5 year plan and a 5 to 10, 15. This really this is a 20 to 30 year plan. Mm-hmm. If you really think about it. It's very long term, and that's what these plans are supposed to do for us. So my answer to that would be hopefully yes. I think in terms of if someone calls and says that they see that they have a sidewalk in their neighborhood, that we can give them some sense of whether or not it's in the near future or it's not in the near future. Similar to what we do now, it's on the comprehensive plan. We don't have it in the funding stream right now. But the idea is because it's on the plan, if opportunities arise or residents petition, those other ways of moving it up in the priority, we would do that.
Thanks. Other questions? Commissioner LaForce?
So maybe related to that in sort of an opposite way of looking at the question. So you look at the map on Valley View near Normandale Church, and we have a proposed sidewalk that we just evaluated recently and voted, or the council voted not to put it in. So now if residents on that street are looking at this map, I would think they're going to be very confused, because I'm guessing in their view, they decided they didn't want the sidewalk. They made their case. The council sided with them, and they're going to be wondering, well, then why is there a sidewalk still on this map? And I guess I'm opening it up to the whole commission. I mean, what do we say in response to what they're going to obviously come and ask about?
Well, I think a sidewalk should stay on the map. There are other sidewalks here that came up in the past and were rejected by the council. I think it should stay on the map because it's needed, and there are principles that go into the planning, and the principles don't change just because somebody doesn't support the sidewalk. And so that's why I think it should be there. In terms of what you would say, I don't know.
I mean, we're sort of saying, all right, we didn't put a sidewalk in this time, but it's the city's intention to put one there one day anyway, or the goal anyway is to put one there one day.
I think so. I mean, as long as the needs stay the same. And I was thinking about the way to say this, and I sent Mark a lot of feedback already, so I'm not going to go into that, but there's some planning that goes in on the front end, but then kind of, Tom, like building on what you said, after a sidewalk is on the map, the justification needs to be there, because when it comes to trying to present a sidewalk during a project, it's not going to be enough to say it's on the map. People are going to want to know what it is about the street that calls for a sidewalk. And there should be not, just one thing, but there probably are many things that call for a sidewalk, and that's how it got on the map. But then the other point that was brought up is that some parts of town have so many sidewalks, and that is so clear. But it's because the street network varies so much in Edina. And so in the northeast, you've got more of a grid, and then you get down to the southwest, and it's a lot more open. And I think Mark's done a good job of identifying where to put the sidewalks so that people have the walking routes that we've talked about, and they can get to some of the key places. I think it's good work. It's so exciting to see it shaping up.
Planner Nolan, I wonder, I think Commissioner Janovy made a good point in that there's a better explanation for why sidewalks end up on the map and why they are to be constructed than just that they're on the map. I wonder if you could name a few of those considerations, things like, since we are on camera for this meeting, I think it would be helpful, educational for the public to hear.
Well, many of the sidewalks that we're showing, for instance, those that are on those streets that are collectors of local connectors, those are streets that not only provide connections to and through neighborhoods to other points of destination, but they're also streets that may have a higher number of vehicles traveling on those streets. So making them a little bit less safe potentially for pedestrians to be walking in the street, given that there are more cars traveling through on those streets. A lot of times using them as cut-throughs for a neighborhood, perhaps, to get from one place to another. And that's one reason why sidewalks and the Living Streets Advisory Group has determined that sidewalks should be required on at least one side of those streets. We mentioned earlier about sidewalks being required even on local streets where sidewalks are optional. They're required where streets are adjacent to or in the vicinity of a park, a neighborhood park or community playground or a school. Those are other criteria, obviously, to make it safer for kids and families to get to and from school and to and from parks. Those are other reasons why those sidewalks would be indicated.
Great, thank you so much.
I do have a couple comments, and One was to thank you for getting this out to us. We've been looking for something like this for a long time, and it's good. I think there's some improvements that we can make that we've been talking about tonight. One of those areas that we're talking about, we're looking at later tonight in the Traffic Safety Committee report, that Valley View just east of Tracy. That area, we had suggested a sidewalk a couple of years back that did not get built when those got reconstructed, and that's still on there. One of the questions I had was, you've got the markings. Are you generally trying to show which side of the road, or are you just trying to show that they might go on a road?
The intention is this is a very high level of analysis, so when we look at putting sidewalks on one side of the road or another, that we consider things like where adjacent sidewalks are currently and how we could connect more directly to those. And again, a very high level, looking at aerial photography and other things like that to determine basically where a sidewalk would go. And then the actual location would be based on a feasibility study when a project is proposed.
Okay, and just one more comment. One area that's in my neighborhood that does not have a sidewalk, but it is shown here, is along the Normandale Park area along 66th. There's a major path on the east side of 100 along the Lake Cornelia, and you come up sidewalk all the way to 100, and then from there down to Ridgeview Drive, there is no sidewalk.
Along the park.
Along the park or anywhere along there west of 100 up to the first block there at Josephine. It's a very heavily traveled path because people try to get over to the park and walk around the loop there. People ride their bikes up and down. It's a steep hill, obviously. Getting a sidewalk in there is going to be quite difficult, and I know it's not on the current plan to do in the next year or so, but I'm wondering, the road is quite wide there. I wonder if there'd be a possibility of a curb bump out or something where we could utilize some of the width of that road. There's not a lot of houses fronting that street. If we could somehow use some of that right away for a sidewalk and maybe get something done earlier than later on that.
Okay.
I want to totally agree with what he said, and then just kind of suggest that there is some room for trying new things, and whether it's pouring another curb or whatever some of the newer ideas are. Don't know if 66 would be the place for it because it's so busy, but I do think there is a sidewalk needed there sooner than later. And I put Benton in the same category. There are a few of those streets that really should have them.
Yeah, I would agree with that spot too. Just chiming in, I run that hill a lot, and it is kind of dicey, especially if you get stuck in any type of weather. You leave your house and it's nice, but then it starts snowing, and you have to get up the hill, and cars are coming down. And I've seen people with strollers struggling up that hill. It's raining. I mean, just that doesn't happen often, but it is a spot where, because of the park and just because it is a good way to get through, that people do seem to use it a lot, and it's a great place for a sidewalk, I think. So just agree with
I think
others on that.
we find in a lot of cases that those, and you're speaking to a couple of them right now, those areas that are really in need of sidewalks are also those areas where it's most difficult to get one in, and that comes into play when we're thinking about ways to fund it. The PACS fund is about $1.1 million a year. That's enough money to build any one sidewalk in the city, but so what we're trying to do is balance that. So these first couple of years of the PACS fund, the idea is to get some things constructed, show some progress, and then after this year, next year, we can start to take a look at some of those other sidewalks that may eat a third or half of that fund up, and finding ways to balance that with other sidewalk projects and other bike projects and other pedestrian projects throughout the city in any given year.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Iyer?
Real quick, I'm curious about the sidewalk, the active routes to school down Oaklawn in the southeast quadrant. where it connects to kind of there's a large student population that goes to Cornelia in that neighborhood of Gallagher and Park Lawn. That sidewalk would run really right today across private property to get through there. I mean, it'd be a wonderful connection point, but I'm curious if there's been any kind of discussion on putting a sidewalk through that area.
The city currently holds an easement in that area, just what we're looking at there on the kind of the northwest where it curves on, where the extension of Oak Lawn comes into Park Lawn.
Yes.
And we've actually partnered with Three Rivers Park District on ways to connect to getting our sidewalk network and our trail network to connect to the future trail that Eric Nelson was just talking about. And we've actually gotten funding from them. Well, we're part of their funding package. They're looking for federal funding to build that connection. So they would pay for the land and they would pay for that connection. And then the city then would implement the sidewalk to the north along Oak Lawn.
All right, that's good news. Thank you.
Commissioner Iyer?
So, Mark, I'm glad, Chair, you asked Mark to list some of the criteria for prioritizing these sidewalk activities. Just launching off the discussion on that 66, the Hill sidewalk, I think, I'm just going to chime in and say that's one of the highly important ones that needs to be implemented. And to me, it's also a safe route to school for southeast quadrant students to get to Edina High School. And I remember having this discussion about maybe 6 months ago, talking about priorities and all the reasons for the priorities and, which one to do first, which one to do later, things like that. What are the different kinds of arguments that come into play to make that call? Is it possible for the city, the staff, to come up with a matrix of these are the, I don't know, I can see here maybe 50 of them, I think, I don't know, total number of sidewalks that are being proposed here. And a matrix where it says, I give it a rank of this for safety, I give it a rank for this for safe routes to school, or, safety in terms of too much traffic safety, safe routes to school, arts reason, and then there's the connection to shopping district or connection to this or that, or, so there's different criteria, each of them can be weighted, and then you can give an overall rank to a certain sidewalk. That gives you the motivation to say, okay, we want to do this one first or this one later. And then the next big discussion that I remember having at that time 6 months ago was the opportunity. If there's already construction going on, can we, tag this one on to that one? So so there are two things here I'm talking about. There's the priority, and then there's the speed at which we're going to get these things done. Mm-hmm. So a matrix, an engineering matrix, would be something that would be very useful. I don't know. This is how I would do it at my workplace. Mm-hmm. Create a matrix and prioritize them and weight them. Is that something that the staff could possibly take a crack at?
We've done some of that with when we have a shorter list of sidewalks and ways to compare those to one another based on the priorities and criteria that this group and we've talked about over the past few months. I think it would be a big staff effort to do that for each of the sidewalk segments, but I think in terms of engineering and ways to prioritize, that's still on our list of steps in that process, I think. We have found that some of this, it is, I want to say a moving target, but each year there are different opportunities and different ways to look at ways to prioritize, but that would be, for me, could be a way to help us at least be able to compare one to another or one group of sidewalks to another group of sidewalks.
Commissioner LaForce?
I think it would be useful to have this document online. I mean, we labeled it it's sort of a living document, so that any time a resident could go on and say, okay, here's the latest thinking on what might be coming down the road for sidewalks. I was talking to a resident the other day who had moved from Minneapolis, and he was sort of bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough sidewalks in Edina, and I was actually happy when he told me his street to see on here, it's like, oh, there's one on your street. I mean, I have no idea when it's going to come, but at least he'd be able to see that it's in the plan. And I think for people who either want to live on a sidewalk or don't want a sidewalk near them, this just helps. It's kind of like the road reconstruction plans. You can kind of look out for 5 or whatever it is, 6 years and see what's coming. This, and even if it keeps changing, that's fine. But at any given moment, you can go on there and see that sort of current, latest thinking as to where sidewalks might go.
No, I think that's definitely what we'd like. That's the goal. I think once we get it past a few steps in terms of approvals and thoughts from this group and from council and from the Living Streets group, that's definitely what we'd like to do. This could be as part of the Living Streets plan online and also part of the comprehensive plan as well, where you can actually get in some detail on these maps.
Yeah, and those are, again, part of that, those things could be part of that matrix too. That, it's part of comprehensive plan, so it's got a priority. It's part of the Living Streets plan, so it's got a priority. And, I'm going to go back to what Commissioner Janowy mentioned earlier, that I totally agree with you. If a sidewalk has been decided that by engineering and by, some kind of thought that's been put into it, that this is an important piece of street that needs to have a sidewalk, it should stay there. And if we have that criteria matrix in front of that, then City Council can look at that and say, yep, this increases safety and this connects us to other places in the city, but I'm going to still go ahead and overrule it and not do it. And that's fine, right? They're the elected representatives and they can do whatever they want, but they should have that information in front of them in that matrix. So I think, again, I'd really like at least some kind of maybe even the top 10 sidewalks to have some kind of a matrix put together for that, different criteria. Okay, thank you.
I have a couple more questions. Just noting that I know this is part of a broader pedestrian plan, not just a sidewalk plan. Is it on our to-do list also to be continuing to identify other easements that the city has that could potentially be developed for connections? I'm just thinking too, the Active Routes to School plan was one of the recommendations and one of the findings from the consultant's work, that there are lots of places in the city where, as the crow flies, the distance between a neighborhood and a school is rather short, but because of the street network in that particular area, the distance that students have to walk if they stay on the street network is quite long. But that if there are easements that could be developed that would, shorten the distance that students have to walk, that could be helpful in supporting kids to make an active choice. So that was one question. And then my second question is there any, I don't think this necessarily needs to be on the maps, but I'm just wondering if there was ever a evaluation of where transit stops are in the city and taking that into consideration with sidewalk placement. I'm just thinking about, the situation on France Avenue, and happily we're able to rectify that situation of many, many people using the transit stop on the east side of France and getting off and, well, actually not having anywhere to wait or get off and be able to go where they need to go. But, I just think we need to make sure that we're balancing the needs of transit users as well as we look at where sidewalk facilities are.
And to answer your question, both of those topics have been discussed. I wouldn't say they're really at the highest level. Mm-hmm. I know that we've gotten quite a few comments, and me personally, finding ways to put transit at a higher place in the Living Streets process and then in sidewalk planning as well. So that's one of the reasons we come to this group. I think it's a great suggestion, so we'll be sure to look at that again. And same goes with the easements. I think Highland School is one example of that, where we're looking at ways to make connections to the surrounding neighborhood. So we will definitely take a closer look at that as well.
Great, thanks. Any other questions before we close out this discussion? Okay, thanks so much, everyone, for your thoughtful insights and questions for Transportation Planner Nolan, and we really appreciate your work on this, and it's exciting to see this moving forward. So let's move on to our next agenda item, which is the advisory communication for an ordinance change allowing bicycling on sidewalks. And we have the draft document in front of us that was developed by Commissioner Janovy and reviewed by Commissioners LaForce and Becky. Should we just open it up for discussion? Or do you want to say a little bit about the preparation?
Well, I'll just tell you what some of a couple of things that were added. The map. The purpose of this map, I wanted to just get kind of an idea of where we have sidewalks and where we have on-street dedicated facilities coexisting, because there is local research, Minneapolis research, showing that dedicated facilities have been successful in Minneapolis at moving people off of the sidewalk and onto the street. Now, not 100% of people, but they've been pretty successful, and that's the article that is included with the communication called The Skinny on Sidewalk Riding. And so that was that thinking. And then attached are a couple of educational pieces from Madison, Wisconsin. Nothing fancy, but educational about how to ride on the sidewalk safely. And then I thought it was just informative to show what we currently have in Edina, which is a page that says, basically, don't do it, it's illegal. So there's not much education happening, which is a concern that we've all talked about before. And then with that, let's just talk about what we have.
Any comments or discussion about or otherwise edits to the advisory communication? I think we can still take edits, correct? Yes.
I just have some comments that there's been some continued pushback from the police department suggesting that this is just an unsafe practice, similar to what we had discussed with them approximately a year ago. Maybe it was even longer.
2 years ago, I think.
More than 2 now? Okay. And then they suggested there were some things that were inaccurate in our, did you ever find out any more about what the inaccuracies in our resolution were?
No, I didn't. And I asked Mark to forward, and he forwarded to you the email exchange I had. I asked to, because the goal of asking was to find out what the concerns were, because we have the opportunity to make adjustments before it goes to the council. But they declined to talk about it, and so we don't have that information.
And we also don't have specifics on what they felt like was misinformation or inaccuracies.
No.
Okay.
So I mean, I was just thinking about this before I came again, and I just wanted to sort of back up and summarize what I think the various proposals and maybe concerns are. I mean, first of all, I would assume that we all agree, us, and I would guess the police department would say the same thing, that in general, biking on the road is the right and safe place to be. I would think we're all saying the same thing. I guess I don't know that for sure, but I would also guess we would probably agree, but that's not for everyone. I mean, there are circumstances with maybe younger children, or I was even thinking today about the southeast, the whole southeast part of town. It's all, I mean, it's loaded with really busy roads, lots of multifamily housing. I don't see how a kid, for example, can get anywhere. I mean, say from the very southeast corner of town, they have to either bike on York Avenue or on the sidewalk, or they don't bike at all, unless they're just going to run around the parking lot. I mean, there's nowhere else for them to go. So I would think we would agree on that there are cases when it doesn't make sense to put somebody on the road. What I hear us saying we want to do is to remove the illegality, but continue to promote riding on the road. What I think the police are proposing is to maintain the illegality, but from what I'm hearing, they don't generally enforce it. So it's kind of like we're all looking for the same ends, but we are having some difference about what actually goes into law.
A good way to put it.
I feel like, Jennifer, you made a great point saying that if something's illegal, we can't do any kind of education on it. And I think that that's a big point, because even if it is safer for younger children to ride on the sidewalk, and they are going to go ahead, and parents are going to allow that, which I have done that and am most comfortable with that scenario when my kids were little. I think that the education piece of it is really important. And, if it's illegal and therefore we can't give guidelines or education, it just seems that, changing the ordinance would help make it safer. And I'm curious too, it's legal in St. Louis Park and Bloomington, Minneapolis. So there must be data on, crashes and, how dangerous it really is. It doesn't, you would think that we would be hearing the other communities having trouble with it, and maybe there is, but I haven't heard anything like that. It seems like there are good examples in other communities where it's working out okay. So I don't know, it just is, from that standpoint, and being a parent, it strikes me on a gut level as being safer.
I think actually that would be a good addition to the advisory communication, is noting the other communities that surround us. Bloomington, Richfield, Hopkins, Eden Prairie, St. Louis Park, Minnetonka, and I believe Minneapolis, that all permit riding on sidewalks pursuant to state statute, and possibly even including some information about what their ordinances say. But I guess that leads me to ask, I think you may raise a great question if it's working there and it's permitted but not promoted, there's no reason that it can't work here. And when developing our Active Routes to School plan, which I presented in front of this group 3 months or so ago, when we talked with students from Edina High School, the students surfaced the issue unprompted, that they were aware that it was illegal to ride on sidewalks, but had been instructed by their parents to only ride on sidewalks. And they were conflicted about this. And so they're left with a choice of either we, disobey our parents or we do something illegal. And that's not a good choice to leave our young people in. And with a ban in place, I think it really prevents us from having a community conversation and doing that education that needs to happen about the risks and responsibilities of riding on sidewalks. And I think it's really important to make this change. We know that kids have the physical motor skills to ride a bike by the time they're 5 or 6, but the ability to judge traffic safety risks develops much later, usually between the ages of 10 and 14. I think that should probably be included in the advisory communication as well. That children 9 years of age and younger, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, are not able to identify and adjust to many dangerous traffic situations and therefore should not be allowed to ride in the street unsupervised. So I think there are, where we agree with the police department, is that there are risks to riding on the sidewalk. And people of all ages in Edina ride on the sidewalk all the time. And we can't talk about the risks and educate people if we have a ban in place. And I think that we're not doing our duty by the residents of Edina if we, keep that in place and ignore the fact that this behavior is happening all the time. So that's my position. Commissioner Iyer?
Thank you, Chair. So it looks like I'm going to be the only person on the other side on this argument here again. I understand the point that children are being told that this is illegal, but you still want to do it because it's safe. But then rules and ordinances are not all the same. Some ordinances prevent activity that we want to stop all the time. Some ordinances try to prevent the extreme of those activities. So again, I think the police department, the reason it doesn't enforce it all the time is that they're looking for misuse of this rule. So if there's somebody who's driving too fast or biking too fast on these sidewalks, then they can go and, again, I don't know what they do with that, but at least they can go and warn them and say, don't do it, or, get off that sidewalk or something. So not all ordinances are the same, and not all punishments are the same either. And so I particularly don't see the problem in having an ordinance that gives the police department an option to take action when needed. And in most cases, as you said, they don't have to take action, they don't. And the other point that I've made before, I'm going to repeat again today, is that the other inconsistency in this argument is that if we want bikers to use roads or bike lanes or whatever it is, streets, and that's the way we want to go, then saying that, okay, it's okay to use the sidewalk is, again, not consistent with that. If you want to, again, the education then becomes conflicting. Is that, what are you going to tell them? You can use the sidewalks, but really we don't want you to use the sidewalks. We would rather you go on the streets. And then the justification for going and building bike lanes or designating these roads as, bike routes and things like that goes away. Because then people can say, well, why aren't they right on the sidewalk? It's legal now. So, again, I feel like we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. And we're preventing the police department from taking action when some people misuse it, and we're taking that away from them. And actually, I think there is data that shows that sidewalks cause more accidents. Actually, I think I was reading the material that you attached. I think it points out that a large number of accidents happen because of misuse in sidewalks. And it's actually more than people riding the opposite direction on a street. So there is data available that shows that we don't want them to be doing that. And I agree with you. Most people, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a percentage. 99% of the people who use sidewalks and bike on sidewalks probably do it fine. They're careful. Most of them are parents with their children who'd rather not have their children on the street. But again, I feel like we're solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved.
I feel like there's a little bit of double duty, though, with the ordinance and the state statute. I think on page 3, it indicates that riding recklessly on a sidewalk is illegal according to the state statute. So these behaviors would be enforceable by the police. Anything that needed to be enforced is already covered under the state statute. And I think the bike lanes still absolutely have a place, because if you think about biking, you take a 5-year-old on training wheels and they're going slower than walking speed versus an adult who can go 16, 17, sometimes 18 miles an hour, people who are bicyclists. And it's just, I don't think it's appropriate to have those two types of cyclists necessarily on the same path. I have, I wanted my kids to be a certain type of cyclist before I would take them to the trail around the lakes, because the biking can be really, really fast, especially on the weekends when people are training for something. So I see, I just see the need for both, and I think that, a lot of the things that we're talking about that the police want to enforce will be enforceable still. And yet we can then start talking about it because it won't be illegal, which I think is, just as a parent and a teacher, the ability to be able to talk about something and teach how to do it safely, I think is really important. And the distinction between, not riding where businesses abut the sidewalk, that making the distinction between the type of sidewalk and where it's okay. I think that people, the people who are already riding on the sidewalks, the kids, are probably the people who could really use some education, like use a bell, maybe say on your left, let pedestrians know that you're passing. So I feel like that population who is already riding on the sidewalk are the people that really could use some tips on how to do it safely. That's just, my opinion.
I would thank you, Commissioner Becky, and I would just echo, why is Edina so different from all of the other communities around us that we need an outright ban on riding on sidewalks that the state statute won't do? I think this is a case in which we're using a hacksaw when a scalpel will do. We can craft a resolution that still provides the law enforcement to enforce bad behavior where it happens. They still will have the ability to do that. And I believe that that's really important. But as Commissioner Becky points out, this also allows us to acknowledge the reality of behavior and to provide instruction and education on the risks when it's needed. Other comments?
Yeah, I would agree. The one thing that I didn't find a reference to in the statute is speed, and speed is one of the main reasons, is really the reason that riding on a sidewalk is dangerous. And so the proposed ordinance for Edina would address speed also, and it would go with an educational message. And I think that, to me, I think that there are specific behaviors that create the risk. And those behaviors can be modified through education. And to me, it's critical that that education happen. And that it happen for not only children, but for people of all ages and for motorists, so motorists can learn too how to enter and cross a sidewalk safely. So, this is something that a couple of years ago we debated at length. Bike Edina debated it at length. It's not, we don't want to say, hey, people, go bike on the sidewalk. But people are doing it, they're going to do it, and for some reason, or for some people, it's the only place they're going to ride, and for some people, it's the only appropriate place for them to ride. And so it's critical to talk about it and educate people about it.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yeah, I just feel that what we're trying to say with this is that riding on streets is really safest for the majority of the bikers and the experienced bikers for sure. It also allows us to allow us to bring children out and learn a healthy alternative to the transit options they currently have. So I think with that, I would move approval of there were a couple
There are two changes.
Move approval of this ETC advisory communication to the City Council.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, or is there any discussion?
Will the chair indulge me one more minute?
Commissioner Iyer?
Thank you. So again, I'm fine with that. I understand all the arguments. Trust me, I understand all the arguments. And it's a difficult thing to be on the other side of. But again, what is it that we're going to educate them? The only piece of data in this communique that Commissioner Genevieve has provided says that sidewalk riding is the leading cause of bike-car crashes in most cities. And so, are we going to educate them that we're going to make sidewalk riding legal, but that is the most dangerous way to ride the bike. So just, I mean, to me, but you can't say that, that is what the data is suggesting, at least the data that's been provided to us today says that sidewalk riding is responsible for 39% of all crashes involved with far more crashes than occur from bicyclists riding the wrong way and from blowing through red lights or stop signs. So it is almost 10 times more dangerous than blowing through a stop sign. So what is the education component going to be? Is that, yes, we made it legal now, but it's 10 times more dangerous to do this than blow through a stop sign?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the comment. And I think that is in part what we need to talk about, that when parents make the decision and children need to ride on the sidewalk versus riding in the road, especially on higher volume streets, what the dangers are and how to adjust your riding behavior appropriately. That is a really important conversation, and I think we could probably elevate that a bit in the advisory communication. I know the attachment of the education information from Madison was included as a appendix piece almost to the advisory communication, but we could lift some of that out to describe what education needs to take place for that audience of riders that are, as Commissioner Nelson said, only going to bike on the sidewalk. Any other discussion? Okay, then we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor of moving the advisory communication as amended to council with our recommendation? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
And nay? Thank you very much. We'll move that forward to council with those edits. Okay. Next, we have up the Traffic Safety Committee report of April 2nd, 2014. Are there any comments or questions on that report? Commissioner Janovi?
I'm not ready yet. I have to look at my notes and see what I meant.
Anybody else that has
I'll take a
comments?
crack at one.
Commissioner LaForce?
Yeah. Recommendation A1 to add the speed signs on Valley View. My question would be, is there any data out there that suggests that speed signs actually helps? I mean, we're going to put a sign on Valley View. Proposal to put a sign on Valley View that says 30 miles an hour. I got to think everybody on that road already knows it's 30 miles an hour, and I would attribute most of the speeding that happens there probably to the fact that there's a big hill, and people just start flying down the hill. So I'm okay with putting a sign there. I just don't think it's going to do any good. And I'd be curious to know if anybody knows whether or not there is evidence that would make a difference.
I can't speak to that directly. I do know that the thought in the committee is that this route gets used as a cut through for a lot of students and there is a hill there. That's also very true. And the thought was that talking to our sign coordinator, that there is really no speed limit sign for a very long section of that road. So the idea was at least putting in one sign can at least let motorists know, remind them of the speed. But I think we could probably find evidence and studies to support both, whether signs like that help or not. And I think putting up the dynamic speed sign can be helpful. I mean, it's shown to work. We can argue about how the longevity of its effectiveness once you take the sign out, but I think that's something that should help.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. What I've read is that the regular speed limit sign is probably not going to change behavior, but the dynamic speed sign does help modify behavior as long as it's in, just like Mark said. But the question this one raised to me is, as a community, we have goals for making the city safer for people walking and biking and driving. And what role does speed enforcement play in that? And in the city manager's blog or Friday report recently, he listed again the, average speeding ticket on local road is still like 15 miles over the speed limit, which is deadly. If there's a collision with a bicyclist or pedestrian, that's deadly. So what role can enforcement do to help the community meet its goals to be safer for everybody? And that's the question that it raised for me. And I frankly would like to see speed limits enforced at a much lower level.
Commissioner Nelson?
This is another one of those roads where it's quite wide, and this is also an area we're looking for a sidewalk. It just happens to be one of those things that I was thinking about tonight as we were talking here, and maybe this is another option to somehow narrow that road so that the speed doesn't. There are quite a few homes on this road, but so the speed doesn't become such an issue. Because if you have a wide road, it's pretty easy to go fast on it. The narrower you have it, if we put some bump outs or did something, other treatments with it as well, it might slow the speed as well.
And that's what staff discussed at the meeting too, and in the recommendation about doing further study. This road is, I can't remember exactly what year it is, but due for reconstruction within the next 2 to 3, 4 years. So the idea is to learn these lessons and also implementing some of those tools that we're talking about with Living Streets, and also the stretch of Valley View and Birchcrest where we are putting in bump outs. That's something that we're going to consider when studying this road in the future.
All right, thank you.
Well, and from a pedestrian standpoint, I mean, all I know is my own habits, but I'm walking this road all the time. If I venture across the tracks, I have to come back across the tracks, and I've got pretty much two options or three. I go up to Vernon, and I come down. I can either cross Benton. If I don't cross at Benton, I've got to cross here. So it's one of those pinch points where pedestrians and bicyclists all have to use this route. So, and as I'm walking up the hill, I can't. There's many times either my wife or I are sort of nudging each other in as cars are flying down because they're coming fast. So it is. I think this is a really important. I think this is an important problem to deal with because I'm guessing there's a lot of pedestrians on the road, and I know the speed is high. I'm just not sure that the sign's going to do the trick.
Other questions or comments about the traffic safety report?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just on A2, where you're talking about the putting different flashing lights at Halifax and 51st, are those similar to the newer flashing lights that are going along that 66th over by the
They're the
park
same rectangular rapid flashing beacons that are going in, except that instead of putting in a new sign and post, they're going to be mounted to the existing sign, the existing post on both sides of that street. And the advanced warning blinker or beacons will still be left in there as well.
So they'll be lower than the current ones. They'll be
That's
on
right.
the post, not over the street.
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Genevieve?
I had a question on A4, which is temporary no parking signs at Countryside School on Arbor Avenue. And I don't have an issue with that, but I did have a question about what's the principle here, because I think there are probably other places that people would like to have it posted no parking, like wasn't Creek Valley, during the Creek Valley project, remember, the field there is used for soccer, and it's an issue. In fact, it does have some signs up now, but I think there are other parks, and so kind of my feeling is, what is the principle here, and where else can it be applied so that there's some uniformity in approach throughout the city for this kind of concern? And then I did have one more question, or it's a question.
All right, you want to stay the same one? Otherwise, can we?
Oh, no, I
have
was going to
some-
move along, so.
Okay, well, let's,
Can we? Because I had a comment on that too. I agree that I'd like to know what the principle is. I mean, I thought when I saw this, my initial reaction was, oh, we're doing it because there's going to be cars parked on both sides of the road. It's going to be narrow. And then what I saw instead was the reason was because we're trying to avoid people getting out of their car onto the front yards of people's yards. Well, that happens all over the place. So it seemed like it was setting up kind of an exception or a special rule, and I wasn't sure why. So, I mean, I'm fine with it, but, I'd also argue that if you're getting out of the car, I'm guessing they're walking on the right-of-way. Still walking on the right-of-way, and even though it's on someone's front yard, it's also the public right-of-way.
I'd like to address that. There are other instances where we've done this, and working with the Parks Department on the scheduling of the fields and those certain locations that do get busy during this time of the year. And in this certain case, we did hear from the residents themselves, and we've heard that. And Creek Valley is another example where through the Parks Department, our sign coordinators put up. Actually, it's the community, the officers that put the temporary signs up. This is another one of those instances where it was difficult. We often hear that cars are parked so tightly, and I don't think this is one of those locations, but they're parked in front of mailboxes, and so then the mail carriers won't deliver their mail, and so it gets quite crowded, and that's the reason why this actually came through the Parks Department to us, and then we had the discussion at our meeting.
One question I just have is, it's temporary. Is it temporary for the summer, or?
It's temporary. It's from, I believe, basically early May through the end of the fall season for lacrosse.
And will that be marked on the signs, or will they come down then after the?
They'll come down.
Okay.
Are they cardboard signs, or are they?
They are, but I've just learned from our sign coordinator that there are some nicer signs now that don't have to be bagged, they're made of a material that looks, that won't deteriorate in the weather, that are temporary, that can be taken in and out.
Okay. Commissioner Janovi, you had another question?
This is on B1, in the bold part, where it says, after discussion, staff recommends denying the request based on current parking restrictions policy in the draft Living Streets plan. And so my question was that, well, first of all, this is another one of those what's the principle here question. I do think I would like to look at the city's parking policies because to me there should be places that are marked no parking on both sides. We're not talking about marking an entire street for blocks and blocks, but there are some short segments that should be posted no parking on both sides. But I guess the question I had was, what did it mean that it is based on the current or the draft Living Streets plan? And then my second question is, in a case like this, does the fire department weigh in? Do they on this one? And fire is different than police, and they have different interests.
The fire department didn't weigh in on this particular one, but we did talk with Public Works about snow removal and things like that, and the police is represented on this committee. The reference to the draft Living Streets plan is that local streets, the minimum width in that plan, and we've run it by council to get their preliminary thoughts on this, is 24 feet wide with parking on one side, and that's what exists on this street. So that's one of the factors that went into the decision not to remove parking from both sides of the street. And it was, staff also, based on the conversation with the resident, thought that it also had a lot to do with the heavy snowfall we had this winter, and it's something that is somewhat of an exception, possibly from normal snowfall amounts and how that encroaches on the width of the roadway. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Sure.
There's just a typo on D3. It says Valley View Elementary.
Oh, it does.
I believe it probably means Creek Valley, right?
Correct. Yep,
D3?
that's Creek Valley. Thank you.
Good catch. Just circling back to your comment about enforcement of speed limits, and I think it is on our work plan to be connecting with the police department this year, and I think that is an important conversation to open up with them, especially as it came up in the Active Routes to School, the parent survey that was noted quite frequently about enforcement of school speed zones as being a concern for parents. So I think that's something that we can have conversation with the police department about, hopefully.
And you can be thinking about that over the next month, because the police the new police chief as well as the director of public works will be at our meeting next month.
Great.
Okay.
Excellent. Commissioner Nelson, you had?
Well, I was just going to state in discussion about that Arbor Avenue Countryside School. There, another area I've been to at times is over by Highland Park. All those soccer fields down there, and when they have soccer Saturdays or something, there are parking on both sides of Doncaster, Glengarry, and Ashire, and it's very difficult to get through. So again, equal treatment. I don't quite understand why we're doing it here. I remember not doing it down by the Creek Valley when we did that road reconstruction down there last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago. So I guess I'm just a little, I guess if we're going to forward this on, I would forward it on with like to add a comment. Is this something the park department is going to look for on all usages, I guess, adjacent?
That'll be included in the meeting minutes that are attached to the report for council.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. So we need a motion to move the traffic safety report onto council with comments. Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion? Okay, and all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Nays? Great. Okay, so that motion carries, and we'll move that on. Yes, now we are on to our new agenda item F, which is the Bike Edina ETC Working Group proposal.
No, I don't have hard copies.
Is that going to be difficult? Do people have a way to access it on your phones or your?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Does that work?
Perhaps, Kaylin, could you pull that? Where is it? It's where we keep our, maybe you can help her out. Where we keep, yeah, it's in the iDrive under admin. Okay. Well, if you're able to find where the packet's posted, you could pull that up perhaps, and the commissioners could.
Okay, well,
While we're getting
while
that
Kaylin's
pulled up.
looking, yeah, while she's looking that up. So this is a discussion we've had before, so I won't go into all the background. But after the meeting that we had, that the Bike Edina had with the council, I guess to give people watching this, it might help to give a little bit of background. So Bike Edina was created back in 2006 by the council to create the comprehensive bike plan. When that was done, Bike Edina just continued and had a connection to the city. I think it continued to be a task force, but a couple of years ago, did we adopt bylaws, and the whole idea of working groups came up, was formalized. And so the idea that has been worked out is to make Bike Edina a working group, but with a little bit different qualities to it, in recognition that it's an existing group that's been around for how long? 2006 to now? 8 years? And so it has existing bylaws, it has an existing mission, it's been functioning, and so there's the way to recognize that and make Bike Edina a working group, to give it formal structure or place within the city's formal structure, is to add these few paragraphs to the ETC minutes, and then also to adopt some modified Bike Edina bylaws. I'm sorry, I said minutes before I meant ETC bylaws. And to adopt modified Bike Edina bylaws that explain some of the things that aren't in the ETC bylaws. And the recommended action is that the council would appoint all the existing members, appoint the chair, make us a standing working group instead of a temporary working group, and adopt both sets of bylaws. And this went to Bike Edina last week, and people approved the status change. And Larry can comment too, because he's heard this discussion of 500,000 times. But, you know, I think that we, as a group, are interested in trying this and seeing how it works. Your
One
thoughts?
of the big issues that kept coming up is liability for Bike Edina. The past 4 years, we've held bike rodeos at a couple different elementary schools in town. This year, because of liability concerns that kept coming up, we decided to not hold events any longer. And this would help to resolve that issue amongst others, but that was kind of one of the big ones that prompted this action.
Any questions or discussion about the proposed amendments to the bylaws?
And
On
how
your
it
screen,
work-
oh, I'm sorry, on your screen, we were able to pull up at least what's showing right now is the addition to the Transportation Commission bylaws regarding Bike Edina.
Thank you. And how it would work going forward is the council, as I said, would make the initial appointments, but then as we add members, those would be brought, the chair would recommend, well, actually, Bike Edina would vote to recommend a new member, and then that would be brought forward here, and then the ETC would vote to appoint that member. And then the chair has to be a member of the ETC. Yeah, that's how working groups are. But Bike Edina can have a co-chair that's appointed from its membership.
My understanding that it's just a working group like any other working group and any other commission. There's nothing special.
Well, I think we're special.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Right. I mean, they're really, the only thing I think that's special is this transition period. You know, transitioning into a working group has required some additional structure that maybe the other groups don't have. And I don't know if the other groups have bylaws, but because we had bylaws already and because they were consistent with the ETC bylaws, staff and Bike Edina recommend forward, you know, keeping those going.
So, hearing no other sort of, oh, Paul, do you
Well,
have
I was just going to
okay.
move for approval of the added bylaws, Transportation Commission bylaws, by adding the Bike Edina working group.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great, and any discussion? I will just say as part of the discussion that I think the bike rodeos that Bike Edina has pretty much coordinated and supplied all the volunteer support for, and all the effort that's gone into that is a tremendous public service, and really important that we continue that in the city, so that kids in our city are learning safe bicycling practices and habits and understand the rules of the road. So I think this is a good step.
I have one
Okay.
point of order. Bike Edina has not yet voted to agree to be part of the Transportation Commission. We have.
Yeah.
So right now, we're just approving, are we just approving the bylaw change, or are we actually approving to bring Bike Edina into ETC?
That was going to be my question. So I think what we have to do is, the council will make the action to make Bike Edina a working group. So that the thought is that will be a council action. But the ETC bylaws require us to approve bylaws changes before they go to the council. So that's that step. And then I think we probably should approve the Bike Edina bylaws. I mean, I know that this group will be responsible for approving any amendments, but I don't know if, can you help me out? Do you remember? Should we approve like the whole package, or if people want, or what should we approve?
Great point of order on my first night.
I think so, yes. That's what you and Assistant Manager Kurt had worked on. I think it all works together.
Okay. So the motion should include approving the ETC bylaws, I think probably recommending approval of the Bike Edina bylaws, and recommending approval of that the existing Bike Edina members would be appointed, and existing chair, and that Bike Edina becomes a standing working group of the ETC, which is what the bylaws say. So, is that clear enough?
Can you repeat those one more time?
No, probably not in that order. Approve the amended ETC bylaws. Recommend approval of the Bike Edina bylaws. Recommend appointment of all existing Bike Edina members. Recommend appointment of the chair. And I think just to add on, recommend that Bike Edina become a standing working group of the ETC, which may not be necessary because that's what the bylaws say. but
Yes.
Just for clarity.
Okay.
Just one quick clarification here. So, I mean, if I'm reading it correctly, the city council has established Bike Edina as a working group of ETC.
They haven't done it yet.
Okay. Now, is that normal that city council establishes working groups for different commissions?
No.
Commissions create their own working groups.
That's correct.
So are we doing this differently? Why can't we just create? Why can't just ETC say,
Oh,
Bike Edina is now a working group of the Edina Transportation Commission?
well, I mean, we could. The thought is that the Bike Edina was established by the council in the first place. And so this is transitioning us into this structure. And it's because they created Bike Edina originally. They would see this transition through. And then they would have the ability to disband Bike Edina, whereas we would have the ability to disband any other working group. Bike Edina could only be disbanded by the council.
So they're not really giving us the responsibility. They're just kind of giving us it's a temporary holding place.
Well, there will be responsibility, like ETC will have to approve an annual work plan. So there'll be, supervision there. And we'll have to approve the members and the chair. And have to approve bylaws amendments. So those are all things that would rest with the ETC.
So in a sense, it is a different kind of working group, not a regular working group. So because I understand the transition to ETC, but once it's transitioned to ETC, then why doesn't it just become a regular working group of the ETC, and we can do whatever we see fit with that working group at a later point of time? Why does this city council again have to get involved in disbanding it or changing it or doing anything with it? Because it's then now, I mean, they've given it to us, now it's ours, and we do whatever we want with it, right? I don't
Was
know.
there any discussion of that on?
Yeah, there's been discussion.
I'm guessing there was intentionality to the decision to put that in council's hands to disband.
Well, yeah, I mean, what it is, that a normal working group is, for example, automatically disbanded if an ETC member can't serve as chair, and there are a couple other things in the bylaws. And this would suspend all Bike Edina activities and then notify the council. So it's not an automatic disbanding like a different working group would be. What else was I thinking? How does this? What was clear at the meeting, and I think you all were there, was it's clear that the council values Bike Edina. That was the feeling I got. And it's because they created the group in the first place, and now because of some organizational structural changes, we need to find a home for it. That's what this is about.
Yeah, I think we're probably getting too much in the weeds, but we should move on, I guess.
Okay.
I'm good at getting in the weeds.
So we have a motion and a second on the following, that we approve the amended ETC bylaws, that we recommend approval of the Bike Edina bylaws, that we recommend appointing all existing Bike Edina members and appointment of the current chair. Okay. So we're clear on that. So all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. All right, now we're into updates. And we don't have student members, so we'll move on to Bike Edina meeting notes updates.
I really don't have anything because I just talked about the main thing. Larry, do you have anything?
No, I do.
Okay, any questions for our Bike Edina members? Okay. Great, thank you for that. And we'll move on to Living Streets Working Group. Is there any update there?
Yes, the Living Streets Working Group, also known as the Living Streets Advisory Group, I believe they're one and the same, are they not? Okay. It now has a joint work session with council slated for July 1st. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
From 5 to 7, and that it will be, I believe, in the community room. So just a note, I think we all got an email to that effect, but just to please put that on your calendar, and we'll discuss the Living Streets plan at that point. Do you have anything else, Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to add that the Arden Park D project that we talked about before, it's the section of Arden Park that is to be reconstructed in 2015 between 51st and Halifax, the 50th and France area, and Minnehaha Creek, north of 54th Street. That area was presented to council at a work session on April 1st as the primary first opportunity to incorporate Living Streets into a neighborhood-wide reconstruction project. And we got very favorable comments from council about narrowing streets and possibly limiting parking to one side of those streets. And we had a good discussion about sidewalk infrastructure. Currently, the comprehensive plan shows sidewalks on both sides of almost all the streets in that neighborhood, and we're looking at backing off of that a little bit and trying to evaluate how those decisions are made, and looking at ways to partner with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and funding and implementation of stormwater best management practices in that neighborhood. So we'll keep you up to date on that.
How have you found the developing relationship with the Watershed District?
I think it's
fruitful.
It has, yes. And Ross Bittner, our environmental engineer, is primarily working with them, and I've been involved with that as well. But their staff and their senior staff, they're pretty engaged and have some really interesting ideas. In fact, Engineer Bittner went on a tour of some porous pavement projects in and around the Twin Cities today to look at other ways, and not just rain gardens, but other opportunities to incorporate those types of practices. So they're looking at ways to participate in terms of funding and staff on that project.
Great, thanks. Okay, we'll move on to Communications Committee. Have an update there?
Yeah, the Communications Committee met to discuss some of the maybe recent communications we've seen on projects within the city. We provided a few suggestions. I guess maybe just as a summary, there was maybe some of you had gotten or saw the survey from the city about branding Living Streets. I don't know if you had a chance to participate in the survey or provide feedback. We provided some feedback on the logo proposals. We also suggested that there's a lot of communication about the project on France Avenue and the focus on the benefits to the pedestrians and bicyclists. In our view, there are likely benefits as well for motorists, and our suggestion is just to sort of, tap into that, maybe the engineering knowledge about the project so we can identify what those benefits are as well and include those in the communication. And then the third thing, maybe you all can help, because we had this conversation about some of the language we use around what we do. So for example, we start talking about sidewalks or bike lanes. Sometimes we label them as amenities, which means, I don't know what your definition is, but that sounds like sort of a nice to have. And that really is running against kind of counter to what we're trying to do with Living Streets, which is, we're about providing transportation options for everybody, regardless if they want to walk, bike, they're in a wheelchair, they want to do handstands down the road. Whatever they want to do that's, to get from point A to point B, Our job is to help, provide safe facilities for them. So we're not providing amenities, we're providing facilities, and we're not, we talk about, well, these other alternative transportation modes. And when you use language like that, what that really sort of implies is it's alternative to, the normal transportation mode. And again, I think what we'd like to suggest is, as a commission, we're more neutral about what is the normal mode of transportation. We're about providing people with choices and options. And that was our kind of conversation, and we forwarded it to Mark, and hopefully it was well received.
It was, yes. There were some very good suggestions in there in terms of communication and the nuances of how, and certainly in terms of mode and how we communicate those things. That was passed on to communications, and I'll be meeting with them to discuss that.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, and correspondence and petitions. I don't think we had anything in our packet, so we'll move on to chair and commission member comments. Let's start over here. Commissioner Olson.
I do have one. The new Bike Edina working group is in need of some new members. So if anyone knows anyone that might be interested in joining the Bike Edina work group, or anybody out watching or reading minutes, today you can go to bikeedina.org's website for the application. That will be migrating and transitioning into a city website, but as of today it's on bikeedina.org.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner LaForce.
I'll pass.
Okay. Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Becky? Commissioner Iyer?
Thank you, Chair. So I have a little presentation that I want to show. Thanks, Mark, for downloading it for me. And I do have some copies too, so although if we're going to see it on the projector there, should be more than enough. I'll keep it short. So as Mark's loading it up, this was part of the conversation. Chair, you had given a very, very nice talk about arts and what we're doing, what we're planning for the city. And one of the concerns that I had expressed at that time was about one section of it. And one of the action items for me was, one of the action items for me was to kind of put my ideas together and bring it to the commission and share it. So that's kind of what I've tried to do here. Oops, that's not the right button. Okay, here we go. So really, I'll read through it quickly. The Southeast Quadrant does not, this is again, it's just my opinion, what I think about it. At this point does not have a safe or direct route for the students to their assigned middle school. That is in the Northeast Quadrant. And there's really no good way to access across Highway 62. And the one pedestrian crossing is really just a pedestrian crossing. You can't expect bikes to be, there is facility, but that's not really, to me, it's not really a bikeable bridge. So just to compare, just to benchmark against all the other quadrants, access to schools, there's typically about 3 to 5 such bike access paths that other quadrant students can take to their high school or to middle school locations. Again, I've used some language here that may not be, I'm just trying to make a point is what I'm saying. So my opinion is that at this point, the plan that we have in place is unsafe and it's not really the right route. And there's no short or long-term plan, even going far into the future, for a real bike bridge, ADA compliant, where you can take accessible walking or biking path across 62 from southeast to northeast. And this is just a little additional thing that, I mean, what it seems to be serving at this point is to get people from the Northeast to the shopping areas in Southdale. So that's who it makes sense to, have that bike path at this point. So what I'm proposing, or what I'm suggesting we should change in that really well put Art's plan is to abandon this Valley View Road approach, construct a new bridge across Highway 62 at near Concord Avenue, and kind of, we got to find where it comes down to. West Shore Drive, I guess, is the natural path, I think. It'll be a direct route. It'll be safe. And I've added a few slides that kind of put some pictures in to make my points. The first one here is this is the current plan. And so if you're trying to go, and I actually spent some time, counted all the great thing, Google Maps, I counted all the houses in the quadrants. And so there's 934. I think I'm pretty close in that section, in that rectangle there. And there's 397 units there, and I don't know how many apartments there are. There's probably a whole bunch of them. But in any case, the students who live in those left side or the west side in this map have to really kind of go out of the way quite a bit if they want to go through the current plan. And it's really, and then there's a couple of intersections there that are, we've discussed them many, many times in this commission, quite well known for speeding, running red lights, and so on and so forth. Just seems like not natural. It just seems not the way that you would design it if you had all the power in the world and all the, money in the world. Here's the proposed plan. Again, much more direct route, safe route, ADA compliant if you put a bridge on there, strollers, other things, and Edina Art Center access as well. Edina Art Center is right on that path there, if you follow the light blue line that I have put there. So that's kind of the way I'd like this safe route. At least the plan should, again, as we've discussed in the past, the plan should suggest what the best possible path is. Our plan should not go and say, okay, we're going to cut corners and we're going to do this alternative path, which we know goes out of the way, we know is not safe, and but we're going to do that because it's a little more convenient. So I want the plan and the engineering decisions to be made on what should be the right thing to do, and that's what I'm proposing here. This is just a picture of different bridges that I could put together. There's 3 that get you from northwest to southwest. They're different. I didn't grade them all in terms of safety because that would just be going a little too far. Inserting my own opinions a little too much. There's 4 or 5 of them, northeast, northwest. A couple, and maybe there's going to be one more when we have the 9 Mile Creek facility put together. There's going to be 3. And really, other than the one which I consider really is kind of the worst of all of these bridges, there's really no options on the northeast to southeast connector. So it's a big gap, and I think our plan should include it. If it doesn't include it in the short term, it has to include it in the long term. Mm-hmm. So that's all I had. So thank you very much for indulging me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy.
Commissioner Iron, I'm sure members have questions and comments for you.
And I'll try my best to answer them. I'm
Yeah,
not.
my question is really for Leonard Nolan. Since I've been on the commission, I've heard there's a plan or a thought of improving the bike bridge that is current, or the bike/walking bridge that does go over north of the pool area and north of that park. At least whether or not it's improving the bridge or access to the bridge, because right now it's a staircase. Is there anything in place or not?
There's nothing in place that I know of. I know that former director Hool had discussed the possibility of looking for funding from the state to improve that facility. And at the time, I didn't think it was available, so I'm not sure where that might be at this point.
I guess it came up when we were talking about you bringing the Wooddale bike path down and across that we were hopefully going to somehow put ramps up on either side of that. Okay. And that hasn't gone anywhere.
Not to my knowledge.
Commissioner Janevi?
So thank you for doing this. I remember you brought this up, I think it was when Jonette was here. And do we have any idea why it didn't make it into the plan? Do we know?
When Jonette was here or when I presented?
No, I think it was back even when Jonette was
okay.
here.
I do not know.
Okay.
But I think the plan has not yet been approved
That's correct.
by council, so it's still considered draft.
Yes.
And I think it should be, we can certainly add it as a recommendation to at least, elevate our planning for how to work prioritization of improving that bridge into the recommendations. I think it's a really important point. I agree, because it's the middle school students that really they get to a point where they can bike independently if they have the facilities to do it, that they're at the age where they can do that. And, it's before they can drive, but they want to be independent. And I think this is a really important gap that you've highlighted. So I guess I'd be in favor of connecting with Jonette and asking her to take a look at this, at what you've identified here, and we could have some more discussion, those of us that have been involved in the active routes to school planning, to figure out how to kind of word that recommendation. But I think it's an important point.
I agree. And then it brings up another thing that goes back to what we talked about earlier, the pedestrian map. And it occurs to me that the pedestrian plan should include bridges too. Does it? I mean, I know it's a sidewalk plan, but, a pedestrian bridge is a type of sidewalk, just up in the air.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Any other comments for Member Iyer? Thank you for pulling this together and sharing this with us. It's great feedback. Commissioner Janevi, any comments?
First, thank you to Paul for 2 excellent years leading the group. Good job. I just want to say I was in LA a couple of weeks ago, or it was probably just like last week. It seems forever ago because there's no snow there. And I went to the Ciclavia, which is Catherine can pronounce the real word much better than I can. It's their version of open streets. And this year they closed down Wilshire Boulevard for 6 miles. If you can imagine, in LA, no cars for 6 miles. And I just brought with me, and I can pass it around for people who want, just their various, the handouts they had. In their case, they had historic architecture along the street, which, they could make a whole book on that one. But then this little handout is cute, and it's got safety tips for not only bicyclists, but pedestrians and motorists, too. And then on the back, it's in Spanish. One idea, depending on how you want to, if you wanted to do something like this, you could also put a map on the back. But I thought, it's good. And what I walked away thinking, because we've talked about doing something like open streets in Edina, is it has to be really intentional. has to be more than just closing the street so that bikes can be there. There has to be something more to it, and so it will involve planning and a very clear vision for why we're doing it. But it was good to experience it. And that's all I have.
This is good.
It's so simple.
Thanks for sharing that, Commissioner Genevieve. So I have a couple of things to note. One, I had the pleasure of presenting that Active Routes to School plan as we continue to kind of engage different community groups and talk with folks about the plan. I had the chance to talk with the Community Education Services Board last week, I think. Yeah, I think it was last week. And it was a great, really interested group of folks. We had some great discussion and good questions, and generally a lot of interest from the folks around the table about how they could support various pieces of the recommendations. There was a really great question posed by one of the board members about equity and about our consideration of access to especially bicycles for kids in Edina, and had we thought much about youth in Edina that maybe don't have access to bikes or don't know how to ride a bike. There are some resources in place across the state that different counties or cities have tapped into in order to provide access to teach kids to learn how to ride, and other communities that have done bike drives and things like that. So I think there's opportunity for us as Bike Edina now as a working group for us to continue to move forward with other community partners that are interested, and some additional interest in bicycle and pedestrian safety instruction through community ed, and yeah, so there were lots of opportunities, and great to connect with a different group of folks that clearly had a lot of interest and passion around the issue. I also wanted to just mention that I had a chance to attend presentations at Southview Middle School of 7th grade students who were conducting their apathy projects. And I know Commissioner Becky was there, as well as Transportation Planner Nolan. And I was really struck by, we were invited to hear a presentation from 2 7th grade students around lack of sidewalks in Edina. But a presentation that followed not long after that was one on icy sidewalks and how that was such a concern over the winter, especially for not only students walking to school, but senior citizens in the community. So it was a really great opportunity to hear from youth and the issues that they care about and are interested in, and their proposals for how to take action on those issues. So that was really great, and enjoyed hearing that. I also wanted to just ask Planner Nolan, maybe even in your comments, or you can answer now. I know Commissioner Nelson noted the crazy potholes on that frontage road that are in front of the development where Trader Joe's is. Yes, and Perkins. And I don't know if that was I think you had recommended that we talk to, if we in an opportunity to talk with Bloomington to let them know how bad that was. Is that a Bloomington road?
It is, but
Okay.
and we can talk to them. We're actually going to be meeting with them, both Director Milner and myself, in the next week or so about another matter. We can talk to them about it then.
It looks like they have made some effort to try to repair some of the potholes, but it's still really, really bad. So I just wondered if you could provide any information, if you get a chance to talk with them, to let us know if Bloomington's willing to share what their plans are to address that. I mean, it seems like it needs total reconstruction, but I don't know much about those.
I'll look into it.
Yes, that'd be great. Thanks. That's all I have. Let's go on to staff comments then.
All right, thank you, Chair Bass. We have just a few items. We've touched on some of them. The France Avenue Pedestrian Improvement Project, temporary signals and removals are happening now, this week. And one northbound lane is closed, and I do know that temporarily, a couple times this week, they will be shutting down an additional lane as they do some additional work this week, leaving for a few hours starting in the morning. I just got a city extra on this morning. regarding some construction work. So that's happening. Hazelton Road intersection, that has been added to the project, so that will get the same treatments as the other 3 major intersections in the project. So that's been added. It's pending county and federal approval, but we don't anticipate that being an issue. So I wanted to let you know about that. And again, we touched on communications. 7,900 postcards went out last week to essentially the southeast quadrant. It was an area on either side of the roadway. So those went out this week, and brochures are available. There were 10,000 brochures printed that are available at City Hall and all the public buildings, and are being distributed by the resident construction inspectors. He goes on business walks with people, and he'll have those as well. So those just went out. We just got them in this week, I believe, and they're starting to make their way out there. Promenade, Phase 4. As you recall, Engineer Bittner made a presentation about that a few months back, about the improvements to that area behind the new Byerly site and the new water feature and the best management practices for stormwater. That was to be constructed this year. However, the housing project associated with the Byerly's development is proceeding a little more slowly than we anticipated, and they won't be out of the way until November. So that construction of that project is delayed till next spring. The Birchcrest B neighborhood street reconstruction. Bids were received last week, and they were all quite close. As you recall, we had asked for separate bids for full bituminous reconstruction, then also to repair concrete. And staff is recommending full removal and bituminous reconstruction of those streets based on the costs and a lot of other factors. And that's going to be presented to council, I believe, shortly. And it saves $20,000 overall and $1,000 per REU for assessment going that route. And if you want some more information about that, that will be forthcoming with the report that Director Milner is preparing. Xerxes Avenue and 70th Street sidewalk. So there's a water main project that is on Xerxes Avenue just north of 70th Street on the our eastern border. There's right now a sidewalk on the west side of Xerxes, and there's a 215-foot gap between the sidewalk and 70th Street. So as part of that project, we are going to finish off that sidewalk on that side of the street. It's very inexpensive to do when it's part of a reconstruction project, so that piece has been added. It's about a $14,000 project that we're going to be completing. Other agency projects, Xerxes Avenue. County project, as we're all aware, the bridge and ramps were closed last week. Will be closed for 3 months. CenterPoint Energy is replacing a gas main on the west side of Xerxes, north of the crosstown during this period. So sections of that roadway, there'll always be north and southbound traffic, but that'll be moved to the east as they work on the west side of that road while the bridge is closed. So there are not a whole lot of impacts in terms of traffic because the bridge is closed at that point. And they will finish that project, that is CenterPoint, about the same time that the bridge opens, before the bridge opens, and the county will conduct their mill and overlay of Xerxes from 66th Street all the way to the creek to 54th at that point. And there are 2 meetings coming up. Residents south of 60th Street, between 60th and the crosstown, they're having a meeting on April 23rd. The county is holding a meeting, and those are residents that live directly on Xerxes, and then 1 block on either side in both Minneapolis and Edina. And then a week later, or 5 days, is another meeting for residents north of 60th Street to discuss the mill and overlay project, the process of potentially implementing permanent bump outs, what their thoughts are, what the potential impacts are. So that's happening in a couple of weeks.
Will those ramps be closed off of Crosstown? Because traveling eastbound on Crosstown, when the Penn was closed, I think you could still go up the ramp and go south. Are those ramps are closed now? Will they be closed through the duration?
As far as I know, they will be closed. There may be short periods where they're open. I do remember Penn, sometimes they were closed. I think it depends on the construction activities, but I can get some more clarification on that. I did place a call to the county regarding the bike lane pavement markings and signage on Vernon. I haven't heard back yet, but as soon as I hear back, I'll let you know regarding when they can begin work now that the weather's hopefully consistently staying warm enough for them to do that. Wanted to update you too, the city of Hopkins is working with the county on the Blake Road corridor study. And I am on the technical advisory committee for that study. The city of Edina is funding, it's $10,000 of the $150,000 project. The county is providing about 2/3 of those costs for this project. And the study includes Blake Road north of Interlochen, and it goes all the way to 36th Street. And it's really, the impetus is the Southwest Light Rail Station and what types of improvements. But since the scope, the geographic scope comes into Edina, I'm involved in the project. So we're looking to make sure that what they've said is the corridor will meet what their, complete streets criteria, the county's complete streets policy, facilitate future redevelopment, and developing plans for their federal grunt application. They want a federal grant application by the fall of 2014. So and I've shared with them our desire to maintain bike lanes, add sidewalk, and share with them the living streets criteria as well.
I have a couple of questions. They're quick questions. One is there currently a link on the city's website? If not, could there be, that directs people to the county information if they want to know what's happening with Xerxes? And then number two is, someone just asked me about this a couple days ago. Would now be the time to reapproach the county about lowering the speed limit on Vernon? With the bike lanes, but also it's like, is it 40 by Jerry's also, I think?
Not quite that far. It starts a little further.
So it's 35 by Jerry's or something? But just, drop it down to 30 the whole way?
We
Do you
could
think they'd be open to
start
that?
that conversation. If it's a recommendation of the ETC to do so, we could.
I would make that recommendation. Can I make a motion, see if it fails or dies?
Should we discuss this, please?
Yeah, after I make a motion.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, you can make a motion?
Well, maybe we could bring it up another time, but it's something that we have talked about before.
Yes, yep. Mm-hmm.
So,
Have we talked about whether or not there's been have we done some speed, has the county done speed studies?
Sorry, has the county done speed studies on Vernon?
I can't answer that question. I'm not
Okay,
sure. I can
so we
ask.
probably should have a little more information.
yeah.
Yeah.
Regarding the link to the website for Xerxes, I'm not aware of one right now, and I'm not aware that there's anything to link to at this point, but I will look into that. That's all I have. I would like to pass out Eric Nelson's presentation, a hard copy of that.
Great. Thank you. Well, so that is the last item on our agenda, and I think we're adjourned. My first official gavel. Yeah.
Congratulations.
I don't know what I was. I guess